Hi, I'm Samrat. Amin. I'm the lab manager at the Magnetic Resonance Research Center at ASU.
And I'm Dr. Steve Davidowski, and I'm an NMR spectroscopist.
So today we're going to walk you through what the inside of a superconducting magnet looks like. And we have 7 of these instruments in the lab right now. And this is one of our older 300 megahertz instruments that we've cut open to kind of show you what the inside of it looks like and how it operates. So Steve, you want to kind of walk through what this looks like on the inside and what the various parts do here?
Yeah, so this is where the main action happens. This is the superconducting coil here where there's immense amounts of current flowing through the coil, the superconducting coil, and that's what generates our main magnetic field that we use to do NMR spectroscopy.
And this is miles and miles of just some special alloy, right, that ends up superconducting when you cool it down to liquid helium temperatures, right? So that's typically 4K or below. So depending on what kind of magnetic field strength you're trying to go to, you might need to cool it down a little further, and depends on the magnet, the alloy, various factors. But basically, this whole chamber here you fill with liquid helium then, right? So this entire coil that you were talking about is submerged in liquid helium?
Right. So in order to maintain superconductivity in this coil, this entire cavity would be filled with liquid helium.
Yep.
And then to keep this liquid helium cold, there's 2 layers of vacuum, which is a good insulator to keep that helium cold, and then liquid nitrogen fills this vacuum up here, or this area up here. And then there's another 2 layers of vacuum here to keep that liquid nitrogen insulated from the outside world.
So what's the purpose of the liquid nitrogen?
Liquid nitrogen is to keep the liquid helium cold.
Like a buffer, basically,
Exactly.
right? So this is a lot colder than this, and we all know how cold liquid nitrogen is.
Exactly.
It's typically around 77 Kelvin, right? And this is all the way down at 4 Kelvin. So this is really expensive stuff. This is not as expensive, so we use a lot of that to keep the helium around as long as possible, right? So what about the rest of the magnet then? You mentioned that there's a couple of vacuum barriers out here, right? So that means that if I walk up to this magnet while it's filled with all these cryogens in there, this would be perfect to touch outside, right? Like it'd be room temperature out here, right? So, and then what about all these things out here? Let's walk through those.
So these ports up here are the ports that we use to fill these cavities with cryogens. So these 2 are used to fill the liquid helium down here in the area where the superconducting coil is, and this one back here is to fill this upper cavity here with liquid nitrogen.
So you'd get transfer lines, you'd actually hook it up here and flow cryogens all the way down into the magnet. Exactly. I think if we actually pull one of these apart, you can see there are little plugs out here, and then a couple of these even have tubes that extend all the way down into the dual area in the magnet. Right? Exactly. So what about out here?
So this is where you would actually place a sample when you're doing NMR spectroscopy.
So this is the bore of the magnet then, right?
Exactly. So the magnet by itself is just got a hole here that extends all the way down to the bottom. So the magnet is totally separate, a totally separate component from the probe where your sample actually sits when you're doing the radio frequency pulses and the actual spectroscopy.
And that probe actually goes in from the bottom of the magnet, right? So it houses a coil of it in itself, right? That's actually where you pulse radio frequency, and that's what excites your sample and returns the data or the signal back from your sample as well, which you collect and analyze them, right?
Exactly.
And so you mentioned this bore kind of runs down the center. So your probe is actually sitting at the bottom of the magnet here, and it extends right into the middle region of this coil where your main magnetic field is generated, right? And then your sample, which typically looks something like this with a spinner on it, you would actually drop in at the top of the magnet, and you typically float this on a cushion of air, right?
Exactly.
And when you kind of lower that air pressure, it'll lower the sample itself into the magnet. And then you're ready to go, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Great. Well, thanks for explaining the magnet with us.
Yeah, that just about sums it up.